The greatest cartoon characters of all time, classic television, exciting football in the spring. This is the USCFL Network, celebrating 40 years of excellence. The following is a USCFL Network original presentation. In the traditions of Wonder Woman, Xena, Warrior Princess, and She-Ra, Princess of Power, comes a new heroine for the 21st century. That heroine is Fashion Girl, beautiful, intelligent, resourceful, and powerful. Together with the Style Chicks, Fashion Girl fights crime, injustice, and protects the innocent with style. The world's newest and most unique superheroine ever created is here now.
Сто свечей, твоя грация, ориентиры страстей, острый бритвый взгляд, ясней, чем кристалл, и все говорят, ты тверже, чем металл. И вкус ночи. Fashion girl. Транслируют сны, модели любви.
This is Roby Graham speaking. In 2007, I started writing stories about a fictional superheroine that I call Fashion Girl. Fashion Girl is also known as the stylish crime fighter. And unlike other heroes and heroines, Fashion Girl deals with criminals in an entirely different way. She deals with real-world issues in fictional settings. Fashion Girl lives and protects the fictional city of Colonia, California, located roughly halfway between Los Angeles and San Francisco. Fashion Girl has defended this town since 2004. She was modeled after Daphne Blake of the Scooby-Doo franchise with the traits of Wonder Woman, Xena, and She-Ra. And Fashion Girl is not a hybrid of any of these characters, but she does possess their traits and abilities. Fashion Girl is the leader of a group of heroines called the Style Chicks. Each Style Chick has their own powers and abilities, and in many ways, the Style Chicks are just as revered as Fashion Girl is. Fashion Girl is also a world-class supermodel. She has walked the runways of the world, from New York to Paris, from London to Tokyo, from Milan to LA. Wherever style reigns supreme, Fashion Girl is there. But in this particular story that you're about to hear, Fashion Girl remains at home, and she's dealing with a very interesting and unique situation. I wrote this story a little more than 2 years ago, and at the time, I didn't think that something like this would happen for real, and we're now dealing with it. But there's two things that are different in this story than what is going on in real life. Number one, nobody gets killed, and number two, it's not a federal matter where corruption is going on. In the story you're about to hear, called Lawlessness and Disorder, the Style Chicks deals with a police chief who took over for the former police chief, fired the police force, and hired a bunch of crooked cops. And a prominent judge was thrown off the bench in lieu of a crooked one, while the mayor, recently elected, does not even live in Colonia. He lives in Los Angeles and bought the election. And this was the kind of criminal element Fashion Girl deals with. Unlike Daphne Blake, who happens to be Fashion Girl's mother, Fashion Girl does not solve mysteries. She works on cases. She knows almost immediately from the onset who she's dealing with and why. And with the Style Chick's help, she does help solve the matter and restore things to normal. And this story has been published in a series of books I call the Fashion Girl Trilogy. There are 3 of them in all. The Adventures of Fashion Girl, which is the first book, The Further Adventures of Fashion Girl, which was the second book, and The Final Adventures of Fashion Girl, which is the third book, for which this story is featured in. Fashion Girl also takes on the identity known as Madame D, a tough, hard-nosed ruler of Colonia's underworld. And I am now starting to write a new series of stories where Fashion Girl takes on this persona for real. Only she's not going to turn evil or do anything criminal, but she is going to have a more, excuse my French, a badass attitude. And I hope that these series of stories will one day be published. But for now, and through the courtesy of Alexa, the Amazon app, we now proudly present the story called Lawlessness and Disorder.
Chapter 1. In the criminal justice system, the people are represented by 2 separate yet equally important groups, the police who investigate crime and the district attorneys who prosecute the offenders. However, this isn't one of those stories. Done. I don't have to tell you about how crazy the 2016 presidential election was. But in Colonia, California, the election of a new mayor and police chief was easy for them. Before I go further, I'd like to give you a profile on Police Chief Peter Marcus. Chief Marcus was born in Brooklyn, New York, in 1954. As he stated in the story The Red-Hot Matter of the Ice-Cold Case from the first book, his brothers and father were all New York City police officers. After he graduated high school in 1972, he went to UCLA to major in criminal justice. After graduation, he joined the Los Angeles Police Department. He married his college sweetheart and had 2 children. In 1984, he moved up the coast to Colonia. He made chief in 1998. He's been firm but fair. He's taught his officers to not jump to conclusions before exhausting every possible lead. After Fashion Girl came into the scene in 2004, he worked with her, and they became good friends. Marcus understood that some crimes could be handled by Fashion Girl better than the police. However, Fashion Girl never stopped someone for something petty. Fast forward to 2017, the new mayor, Anthony Coleman, hired his brother William as the new police chief. Just as Chief Marcus was honored for his service with the Style Chicks helping with the celebration, Chief Coleman asked Fashion Girl to speak with him in private. After Fashion Girl walked into his office and he closed the door, he said, "Look, Style Slut, I'm in charge now. I've got a report that states our police force is the softest in the country. Our officers are being compared to overpriced meter maids. They're also the fattest since all they do is hang out at Dunkin' Donuts. When you walk out this door, you can say goodbye to Chief Marcus, and you never darken the front door again. If you or any of your allies interfere in any more police business, if you so much as stop a jaywalker, I'll throw you in prison. Do I make myself clear?" In shock, Fashion Girl replied, "What brought this on? I don't know of any report like that. I certainly would never interfere with an investigation. I'll do what you ask, but mark my words, you are going to make a huge mistake." Chief Coleman said, "It's a new day, Fashion Girl. It's time to rejoice. I will bring this department back up to speed and put you in your place. Now get the hell out of my office and this station." Fashion Girl did what she was told. She went to Chief Marcus, hugged him, and whispered in his ear, "Meet me at the mansion at 6 o'clock." Chief Marcus got the message. Victoria, Godiva, and Macy Sears were on hand too. Fashion Girl said, "We need to go, ladies. Something came up." The others followed Fashion Girl outside. Victoria asked, "What's the hurry? We were having a good time." Fashion Girl answered, "I've just been told off by the new chief. Let's go back to the mansion before we all get into trouble." The others didn't quite understand until they returned home. After everyone was inside, Fashion Girl said, "All right, ladies. I'll tell you what happened now that we're here in private. Chief Coleman told me off in his office. He threatened to put me in jail if I interfere with any more police business." The others had a look of disbelief. Godiva replied, "What are you talking about? What do you mean Chief Coleman told you off?" Fashion Girl said, "He called me into his office, and he told me to no longer interfere with any more police business. He claims there is a report that states that the police force here is the softest in the country, and that all the officers do is get fat at Dunkin' Donuts. If I or any of our allies interfere, I will be thrown in jail." Godiva replied, "That doesn't make sense, girl. You've never interfered with the police. In fact, you've never even made an arrest." Fashion Girl said, "I know, but I think we need to do some investigating here. Vicky, try to find anything online about the new mayor and police chief. Godiva, Macy, I want you both to begin tomorrow to drive around the streets and report anything suspicious. I invited Chief Marcus here, and I'm going to tell him what's going on. Finally, I'll inform the others of what's happening here." Right at 6 o'clock, Chief Marcus arrived at the mansion as Fashion Girl requested. And when he went into Fashion Girl's study, that was when all hell broke loose. Chapter 2. Chief Marcus was in civilian clothes. Fashion Girl had a bottle of fine scotch waiting. She poured 2 glasses, handed one to Chief Marcus, and said, "Chief, the reason why I asked you over is because Chief Coleman told me about a report stating that the police here was soft." Chief Marcus replied, "What report?" Fashion Girl, "If anything, our police force is the finest in the country. What else did he tell you?" Fashion Girl said, "He threatened me and the others with prison if I or the others interfere with police business. The officers are fat because they hang out at Dunkin' Donuts," he said. "But I know that's not the case." Chief Marcus replied, "I admit that some of the officers have put on a little weight, but it's not from donuts. As for me, it's old age. Fashion Girl, we've known each other for years. I know you don't do our work for us. You work with us. Tomorrow morning, I'll talk with the new chief." Fashion Girl asked, "Something's puzzling me, Chief. You wouldn't be re-elected to office unless you were the county sheriff. Why did you retire?" Chief Marcus answered, "Retire? I was fired." Fashion Girl said, "What? Why?" Chief Marcus replied, "The new mayor is a crook. I'm sure he bought the election and hired his brother to replace me." Fashion Girl said, "So that's it, very clever. Get rid of a good man in you, replacing you with a corrupt official. Getting rid of me to make sure that chaos will erupt. Chief, the city will go into anarchy if we don't stop it." Chief Marcus said, "If you try to stop it, you'll go to jail. And, Fashion Girl, don't call me Chief. I'm not the chief anymore." Fashion Girl replied, "As far as I'm concerned, you're still in charge. You're too good a man to just let this stop you from doing the right thing." Chief Marcus replied, "And you're too good a woman to just sit on your hands and do nothing." Fashion Girl said, "Don't be too sure of that, Chief. I have Vicky looking online to find anything about our new mayor and police chief." Just then Victoria walked in and said, "Fashion Girl, Chief Marcus, I found out some information about our new mayor and police chief." Fashion Girl replied, "You're quick, Vicky. Tell us what you found out." Victoria continued, "Our new mayor, Anthony Coleman, is a first-class crook. He's been banned for life from trading on the New York Stock Exchange. He's worse than that Madoff character. His Ponzi schemes are more elaborate and deliberate. He doesn't live here. He lives in Los Angeles, Beverly Hills to be specific. He's got not only his brother William here as police chief. His other brother Donald is now a judge. Fashion girl, we are dealing with some very, very bad people. Chief Marcus got mad and replied, Vicky, how did the new mayor become mayor? Victoria said, he bought the election, and the real candidates didn't stand a chance. You aren't the only person who got fired, Chief. To make Donald Coleman a judge, the mayor fired Judge Hamilton. Fashion girl said, Judge Hamilton is one of the finest judges in the state. Vicky, you're right. We will be dealing with some very bad people. Chief Marcus asked, can I borrow your phone, Fashion girl? I'm giving that tin-plated police chief a piece of my mind right now. Fashion girl passed the phone and replied, be my guest, sir. Chief Marcus picked up the phone and called Chief Coleman. When Chief Coleman picked up, Chief Marcus said, Chief Coleman, I have a bone to pick with you. I'm at the Mystique Boutique, and Fashion Girl told me what you told her about not interfering with police business. Fashion Girl is the best thing that's ever happened to this community. Because of her, the citizens of this city can be out and about without fear that they could be mugged or shot. Not only is Fashion Girl respected and admired here, she's got several commendations from the NYPD, the LAPD, Interpol, Scotland Yard, the FBI, and the CIA. Fashion Girl has always helped us with criminals that I knew we couldn't handle. She has never overstepped her bounds. She's never made an arrest. In fact, she waits for us to come. She doesn't own handcuffs. And most importantly, she has never taken a single dime for her services here. For you to tell her that she's no longer welcome at the precinct or that she can't help the police is a blatant disregard of service and justice. You want my job, fine, but I will not let you prevent Fashion Girl or the Style Chicks from helping this community. Chief Coleman replied, are you done, Mr. Marcus? That's a fine speech, but my decision stands. If Fashion Girl or any of her allies interfere, they will be put in prison. Enjoy your retirement, Mr. Marcus. Chief Coleman laughed as he hung up the phone. Chief Marcus said, I'm sorry, Fashion Girl. I tried. Fashion Girl replied, thank you for trying. I guess my name here is Mud from now on. Chief Marcus asked, didn't your mother and father solve mysteries? Fashion Girl replied, of course, they did. But the culprits were hiding behind masks and costumes pretending to be ghosts or monsters. The police never told them not to interfere, but of course the culprits said that now infamous saying, I would have gotten away with it if it weren't for those meddling kids. So I'm thinking to do what they did. Only in my case and that of the Style Chicks, we're going to be meddling adults. Chief Marcus said, I don't know what you have in mind, Fashion Girl, but whatever it is, count me in. Fashion Girl replied, I'm glad to hear that, Chief. Be the policeman I've always known you to be. We're going to have to wait until morning. I feel that once the sun comes up, the police will get down and very dirty. Victoria, who was still there, added, count me in too. I'd like to teach that bozo a lesson. Fashion Girl replied, don't worry, Vicky, you'll get your chance. Fashion Girl's plan was unknown to the others. But what she had in mind will rock the city like never before. First, she contacted all the allies to have them report before sunrise the next day. Zara was in the area as she docked at the harbor and issued shore leave for her crew. The Cosmo Chicks responded, as did the Fat Cats. The Junior Style Chicks also wanted in on the action. Before long, more than 20 people would converge on the Mystique Boutique for the biggest case of their lives. Chapter 3. Before dawn the next day, everyone was in the mansion as Fashion Girl addressed them. She said, good morning, everyone. I'm glad all of you are here. Here is the situation we have. With the election, we just had a new mayor elected, although he bought it. He hired his two brothers to replace Chief Marcus as chief of police and the top judge in town. I'm no longer allowed to help the city's effort on crime. I've asked you all here because, for the first time and I hope it will be the last, we'll play the criminal element in town. The others didn't understand as Fashion Girl continued. What I mean is, instead of helping the police, we will track their every move. I'm sure Penny helped those with cars to have them materialize here. We will drive all over the area. If the police start their assault on innocent people, we will take note. I'm going to Sacramento to inform the governor about this and to the sheriff of this county. Together we'll put an end to this. Any questions? Macy raised her hand and replied, I've got a question, mate. Our cars are recognizable. How can we be sure that we aren't spotted? Fashion Girl answered, the only two cars that are recognizable here are the Glam Mobile and the Glam Mobile 2. The other vehicles in our fleet are otherwise normal cars. Since I'll be in Sacramento, no one will know the difference. Now here's what we are going to do. Tiffany, you and Penny cover the north end of town. Sephora, you and Belle Kay cover the south end. Zara, you'll patrol the beach area. Godiva, you'll cover the east end, and Macy will cover the west. Wendy, you and the junior chicks will cover the downtown area. The Cosmo chicks will cover the air, while the fat cats will stay nearby. Vicky, take watch from your restaurant and, Chief Marcus, you're coming with me. Victoria asked, should I contact the Justice League or the Galactic Alliance? Fashion Girl answered, yes, let Superman and Shira know what's happening here, but inform them not to do anything until they hear from me. Now let's do it to IT. Once everyone knew what to do and where to go, Victoria took up surveillance from outside her restaurant. Victoria's bistro was now open for lunch, so some of the kitchen staff had to come in early to begin prepping food. Victoria's assistant chef and one of the other cooks were crossing the street, and as they were walking across the street, Fashion Girl's prediction was spot on. A police car pulled up, two beefy-looking officers got out and arrested them. The charge, jaywalking. Jaywalking wasn't even a misdemeanor, so why would two innocent people be busted? It was because Chief Marcus was not the only one fired, so was the entire Colonia Police Department, which was replaced with some very despicable men and women who shouldn't be cops in the first place. That wasn't all. Staying close to their own neighborhood, the Fat Cats also witnessed a crime in the making. It happened to a neighbor of theirs, Mrs. Walter Myers, a soccer mom just coming home from dropping her kids off at school. She was stopped by another unscrupulous officer. The Fat Cats put on their exterior audio so they could hear everything. The officer said, the reason why I pulled you over, ma'am, is because you have a busted taillight. Mrs. Myers replied, Officer, I don't have a busted taillight. The officer went to the back of the car and kicked out one of the taillights and said, I believe you do, ma'am, and it will cost you dearly. The officer issued a ticket with a hefty fine. The officer got back in his car and drove away. Glamour Boy, the leader of the Fat Cats, got out of his car and approached Mrs. Myers. Glamour Boy asked, Mrs. Myers, are you okay? Mrs. Myers answered, No, Glamour Boy, I'm not. Did you see what that asshole did to my taillight? Glamour Boy said, My guys and I all saw and heard what he did. Mrs. Myers replied, Look at this ticket, a fine of $1,500. I can't afford that. Glamour Boy said, You shouldn't have to. We'll stand by you on this, Mrs. Myers. Mrs. Myers replied, Thank you, Glamour Boy. I'm glad you're in our neighborhood. Glamour Boy said, That's what neighbors are for. Let us escort you back home. After the Fat Cats made sure that Mrs. Myers was back home safely, Victoria came on the communicator and said, This is Vicky. Has anyone spotted anything unusual? Glamour Boy answered and replied, We did, Vicky. One of our neighbors who was coming back home was stopped by a cop. He claimed that she had a busted taillight. When she said she didn't, the cop busted it in by kicking it. Something else, we didn't recognize the cop. Victoria said, My assistant head chef and prep cook were arrested for jaywalking. And you know, Glamour Boy, now that you mentioned it, I didn't recognize the two cops either. This was just the beginning. For in the northern part of the city, Tiffany and Penny witnessed something they thought they'd never see, a cop coming out of a bank with a sack of money. Tiffany said, Penny, if I didn't know any better, I think that cop just held up the bank. Penny replied, I saw it, and I don't believe it. Tiffany, did you recognize the cop? Tiffany said, No, I didn't, but then again, we aren't here much. Something isn't right, Penny. This was going on all day. But at night, it was a different story. When Victoria's Bistro was preparing for the dinner crowd and happy hour, the same two officers that arrested two of Victoria's employees earlier that day walked in, and one of the officers said, My partner and I want to eat here. Victoria replied, I recognize you. You arrested my assistant head chef and prep cook. I have the right to refuse anyone's service, and that includes you. The officer said, Oh, Is that so? Either you serve us for free, or we'll shut you down for good, style slut. Victoria asked, just who are you anyway? I don't know either one of you. The officer answered, I'm Sergeant Philip Morgan, and this is my partner, Officer Camille Werner. We're new to the force. We came in after Chief Marcus was fired. Victoria replied in anger, you expect me to not only serve you but to give you free food too. Go ahead, try and shut me down. And you can get the hell out of my restaurant. Sergeant Morgan said, you know why we arrested your 2 employees. They were jaywalking. In this town, jaywalking is a punishable offense with jail time and a hefty fine. Victoria replied, you both are either nuts or crazy. You won't get away with this. Sergeant Morgan said, we already have. Enjoy your dinner crowd with a skeleton crew. Ha. 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 In another part of town, Penny, Wendy, and Jared had a plan of their own. With Penny's magic, she turned herself and Wendy into prostitutes with Jared as their pimp. Wendy said, Penny, I don't know about turning tricks again. Penny replied, I'm not crazy about it either, but we aren't going to turn tricks. Instead, I want to see just what kind of police force this city has now. Tiffany and I saw a cop rob a bank earlier today, and if they are doing that, then solicitation is probably allowed without punishment. Jared said, you know I look good as a pimp, but don't you think I need a pimpmobile, Penny? Penny replied, you're right. Just a second. With a wave of her hand, Penny produced a black Cadillac with gold wheels, bumpers, and door handles. Jared said, yeah, this is what I'm talking about. Penny said, Jared, wait inside the car. Wendy and I will stand under a street lamp. If the cops are crooked now, they'll spot us like flies to honey. Wendy still had reservations about going back to her former profession and asked, Penny, are you sure we don't have to turn tricks? Since I turned my life around, I want to keep it up. Penny laughed and answered, don't worry, Wendy. We aren't going to do a thing but stand here while we wait and see if the police will come around. Wendy felt relieved and said, Rick would kill me if he knew about this. Before Penny could respond, a police car with 2 male officers pulled up and shined the car's blinding flashlight in their faces. One officer asked, what are you 2 fine-looking ladies doing here? Penny answered, if you will be kind enough to turn that light off, we'll tell you. When the light went off, Penny approached the car from the driver's side, while Wendy went to the passenger's side. Penny continued, there, that's better. Now what can we do for 2 gorgeous hunks of our police force? The officer Penny spoke to replied, I'm Officer Xavier Costa, and this is my partner, Officer Daniel Powers. Penny said, nice to meet you both. I'm known on the streets as Blondie, but you can call me anything you want. Wendy added, I'm known in strip clubs as Kid Cleavage because of my huge tits. Do you officers want to frisk us? Or do you want us to frisk you? Wendy gave the officers a very tempting offer, and as they were about to answer her questions and as if on cue, Jared got out of his car, walked over to Penny, and asked, you cops giving my girls a hard time? Officer Costa asked, and who just might you be? Jared answered, I'm Grandmaster J. I'm this town's only pimp. These are the only 2 girls I have since I can't make a dishonest living. Both Fashion Girl and Chief Marcus saw to it. Officer Costa asked, if that is the case, how come you aren't in jail or been ran out of town? Jared answered, to keep the heat off me, I own a nightclub downtown. That's how I met Blondie and Kid Cleavage. Officer Costa asked, I see why this one is called Blondie, but how did Kid Cleavage get her name outside of the obvious? Jared answered, simple. She's a minor and not even a teenager yet. She went through puberty at a very young age. She's a woman on the outside but a child on the inside. She drinks, smokes, and parties better than girls twice her age. Officer Costa said, well, Grandmaster J, I think we can allow you to do business here. The new chief banned Fashion Girl from helping the police here. So you can do what you and your girls like. We'll look the other way. Jared paused for a moment and replied, my girls and I thank you. As long as I don't have to worry about Fashion Girl anymore, I think I can clean up if you know what I mean. Officer Costa said, we'll take a rain check on your offer, Kid Cleavage, but we need to find more honest people to make miserable. As the officers drove away, Jared said, what a pair of scumbags. Did you both hear what Officer Costa said? He's going to make honest people miserable while I as a pimp and you two as hookers can get away with solicitation. Penny replied, I heard it, but I don't believe it. Wendy added, neither do I. Jared said, listen, let's go to Vicky's restaurant for dinner. I'm curious to hear anything more she's heard today. Penny said, I'm also curious as to what the others saw too. Wendy added, my group didn't see anything out of the ordinary, but that doesn't mean that nothing happened either. Jared replied, let's get out of these monkey suits and see Vicky. With a wave of her hand, Wendy and Jared returned to their normal appearances. However, Penny remained the same. Penny kept the pimpmobile available as Jared didn't drive the cat car, nor did Wendy have the chicken coup. Once they got to Victoria's restaurant, they had a story to tell. Chapter 4. Victoria sat and listened to the story Jared had for her. She said, this is unbelievable. My two best employees were arrested for jaywalking, and you can pimp prostitutes. I just don't know what to say about this. Penny replied, earlier today, Tiffany and I saw a cop rob a bank. Victoria said, what? Jared added, as you know, Vicky, the other fat cats and I saw one of our neighbors fall victim to the old kick the tail like gag. She was given a stiff fine. Victoria said, although Fashion Girl asked the Cosmo chicks to keep an eye in the sky, I asked L'Oreal to stay at the mansion to monitor the command center. I'm going to contact her and find out if the others found anything else like what we all witnessed. Victoria called L'Oreal by telephone and asked, did some of the others turn in anything suspicious? L'Oreal answered, the other Cosmo chicks didn't see anything, but Zara said that cops were putting fake fire hydrants by legally parked cars near the beach. They issued massive fines. Victoria said, I don't believe this. L'Oreal replied, wait, there's more. Godiva and Macy both saw a cop changing the speed limit signs on I-5. Drivers were also issued massive fines. Victoria asked, has Fashion Girl checked in yet? L'Oreal replied, yes, she did. She arrived in Sacramento about an hour ago. She checked into a hotel for the night and will see the governor first thing in the morning. Victoria said, have everyone assemble and get their statements. Prepare a report, and I'll try to get it to Fashion Girl before she sees the governor. L'Oreal replied, except for you, Dean Simpson hasn't reported in yet. Victoria said, maybe he has nothing to report. L'Oreal replied, I'll have everyone's statements when you get back home, Vicky. See you then. When Victoria hung up, she said, when the governor hears about all of this, he'll have a fit. Penny replied, what if the new mayor got to the governor before Fashion Girl does? I mean, he could be in the mayor's pocket too. Victoria said, I don't think so, Penny. The governor, from what I've heard, is a fair and unbiased man. He knows that all of this is wrong. But while Fashion Girl speaks with the governor, I'll have Godiva and Macy go to the sheriff's office. We are all going to get to the bottom of this. It was easier said than done, but everybody had to try. Otherwise the city would fall into utter chaos. When Victoria and the others came back to the mansion, she gathered everyone and said, we have dealt with some shady characters in the past, but by far this is, without a doubt, the worst display of injustice I've ever seen. You have bank robbery, writing illegal tickets, changing speed limit signs, kicking out car taillights, conducting illegal arrests, and allowing prostitution. If this continues, it will only take about a week before the citizens of this community start a riot, if not sooner. Tiffany replied, Vicky, whatever it takes, we are in it for the long haul. You can count on that. The others all agreed as they realized that this would take a team effort. CoverGirl said, L'Oreal gave me this report so you can deliver it to Fashion Girl. Just then, the phone rang. Victoria answered it. It was Dean. Victoria asked, Dean, we were worried about you. You haven't reported in. Did you find anything strange? Dean answered, if you call my being in jail strange, then the answer is yes. Victoria asked, what? What did you do that got you thrown in jail? Dean answered, 2 of those strange cops came into my garage for gas. One of them saw my poster of Fashion Girl on the wall. He tore it down and charged me with having contraband. Vicky, they're talking about sending me to San Quentin. Victoria said, that does it. Dean, if you have time to tell L'Oreal the whole story, She'll print it out, and Penny will fly to Sacramento to deliver it to Fashion Girl and Chief Marcus. Dean replied, at least they're letting me use the phone. Put L'Oreal on. Victoria motioned to L'Oreal to get Dean's report. Victoria came out of the command center and said to everyone, that was Dean on the phone. None of you are going to believe this. He's in jail for displaying a poster of Fashion Girl in his garage. They tore it down and arrested him for displaying propaganda. L'Oreal is getting the whole story so we can tell Fashion Girl about it. Tiffany replied, do you think that's wise, Vicky? If we tell her that her husband is in the clink for simply displaying a poster of her, she'll tear that jail down with her bare hands. Victoria said, I don't know what to think right now, Tiffany. It seems like the whole town is coming unglued all at once. If she doesn't know about it now, she might never know about it. As if everyone didn't have enough on their minds, the doorbell rang. Penny said, I'm on my way out, I'll answer it. When Penny opened the door, a middle-aged woman busted her way in and shouted, all right, where is he and that fashion floozy? Come on out, you henna hussy. Victoria recognized the woman for it was Elaine Marcus, Chief Marcus's wife. Victoria said, Mrs. Marcus, it's good to see you again, but why are you so upset? Still shouting, Mrs. Marcus replied, when I get my hands on that two-timing, no good husband and your leader, I'll wring both of their necks. Now, where are they? Victoria asked, Mrs. Marcus, please calm down. Why do you want to know where your husband and Fashion Girl are? Mrs. Marcus answered, Peter hasn't been home since yesterday morning. He hasn't called or anything. I know that he and Fashion Girl are close friends, but I'd like to know just how close. Victoria said, please sit down, and I'll explain everything. Chief Marcus was fired. Fashion Girl, Godiva, Macy, and I were all at his retirement party. The new chief asked Fashion Girl to step in his office. He told her that she can no longer interfere with police business. Fashion Girl asked the chief to come here last night, and she told him about what was said to her. He spent the night here in a guest bedroom, and they both left for Sacramento this morning to see the governor tomorrow. Penny Dillard is about to meet up with them to give them a detailed report of police misconduct. Penny, please come here for a moment. Penny went to Victoria and Mrs. Marcus as Victoria continued, saying, Mrs. Marcus, this is Penny Dillard. You might not know her because she lives in Baton Rouge. She was about to leave for Sacramento when you barged in. Penny added, that's right, ma'am. The report I'm about to give them will most likely prompt the governor to take action. Mrs. Marcus replied, I'm sorry for my outburst, but it makes me mad when Peter doesn't call me. Penny said, I understand. When I get to Sacramento, I'm almost certain they are in a hotel but in separate rooms. The only interest they both have and share is justice. Mrs. Marcus replied, I feel awful, and to think I thought my husband and Fashion Girl were having a romantic affair. Penny said, Mrs. Marcus, if that were the case, they would have gone to Mexico or Brazil. What's romantic about Sacramento? I'm sure it's a nice city, but really. Mrs. Marcus replied, you're right, Miss Dillard. But Sacramento is a 6-hour drive from here. How are you going to get there before morning? Penny said, I can fly, and I can be there in less than an hour. If I see Chief Marcus, I'll have him call you. Mrs. Marcus replied, thank you, Miss Dillard. Tell Peter that I love him. Penny said, count on it. Now if you all will excuse me, I've got some flying to do. Mrs. Marcus had to see it for herself. Penny went out the front door and took to the skies. In amazement, Mrs. Marcus said, look at her go. She's flying just like Superman. Victoria replied, only difference is Penny is an Earth woman. As Penny said, it only took around an hour for her to arrive in Sacramento. She spotted the Glam Mobile in a hotel parking lot. Penny went inside the hotel and asked the desk clerk which room Fashion Girl was in. And when Penny knocked on Fashion Girl's door and based on what she heard about Dean, she knew that the proverbial shit was about to hit the fan. Chapter 5. Fashion Girl opened the door and asked, Penny, what are you doing here? Penny answered, Victoria and L'Oreal prepared this detailed report about the criminal activity that's going on back in Colonia. Fashion Girl said, thanks, Penny. Why are you dressed like a hooker? Penny replied, oops, I forgot I was in this disguise. Jared, Wendy, and I posed as hookers and a pimp. It's all in the report. But there are 2 items I need to tell you about. Fashion Girl said, okay, Penny, tell me. Penny replied, Boss Dean called just before I left. He was arrested. In anger, Fashion Girl said, what? Penny replied, it's in the report, boss. Apparently, any picture or poster of you or your logo is now outlawed. 2 cops came to Dean's garage, saw the poster of you, tore it down, and arrested him. According to Vicky, the police want to ship him to San Quentin. Fashion Girl said, when I get back, I'm going to tear that prison down brick by brick. Penny replied, Tiffany thought you'd be upset by that, but you had to know. Fashion Girl calmed down a bit and said, you're right, Penny. I had to know. But I'm not happy with it. Penny replied, I'm also here because Mrs. Marcus came to the mansion looking for the chief and you. Fashion Girl asked, why? Penny answered, she thought you and Chief Marcus were having an affair. Vicky and I set the record straight. I also promised her to relay a message for the chief to call her at the mansion. Chief Marcus was on the same floor in a room across from Fashion Girl's. Penny gave the chief the message to call his wife to assure her that he and Fashion Girl were strictly on business. Once that was over, Penny flew back to Colonia while Fashion Girl went to sleep and prepare for her meeting with the governor. The next morning, Fashion Girl and Chief Marcus both went to the state capitol building. Although they didn't have an appointment and because of the nature of why they wanted to see the governor, they were allowed to see him. Once inside, the governor asked them to sit down and offered them coffee. Fashion Girl said, thank you, Governor, but we won't take up too much of your time. Governor, a corrupt businessman bought the election to become the new mayor in Colonia. Since yesterday, my fellow style chicks witnessed several instances of police misconduct. Everything from senseless arrests to extensive fines to bank robbery and allowing prostitution. It's all in this report given to me by Penny Dillard late last night. The governor looked at the report 1 page at a time. When he was done, he looked up and replied, these are very serious breaches of conduct. Chief Marcus, why is this going on? Chief Marcus said, it's not my idea. I was given a retirement party by the new police chief, who is the new mayor's brother. He told Fashion Girl to no longer interfere with any police business, or she'd be thrown in jail. Governor, I didn't retire. I was fired. Another brother threw Judge Hamilton off the bench. I believe that together, they will turn our city into a war zone. People won't stand for this for very long. Before the governor could respond, his secretary came in and said, pardon me, Governor, but there is something you need to see on TV. Turn to Fox News. The governor turned on his TV and tuned into Fox News, and what he saw was shocking. Fox News was showing images of innocent people being arrested and thrown in jail for very minor offenses. But it was what they all heard next that was even more shocking. Godiva was also arrested for shoplifting. It seemed that she was doing the grocery shopping. She was a quarter short. Godiva asked the cashier to void the last items she rung up. The customer behind her offered to spring the extra quarter, but a plainclothes officer heard what was going on and arrested Godiva for shoplifting. Fox News didn't show those images, only that of Godiva in handcuffs and being thrown into a police car. What the governor saw made him sick inside. He said, Fashion Girl, Chief Marcus, you have my full cooperation. I will have the National Guard deployed to Colonia immediately. You might not believe this, but I'm one of Mayor Coleman's brothers. I am Lawrence Coleman, and I assure you that I have nothing to do with this. Fashion Girl replied, if you're Mayor Coleman's brother, why didn't you stop him from doing this? The governor said, I knew my brother was a crook, and so are my other 2 brothers. Therefore, I want to help. I guess my brother figured that since Colonia was so well run, and having the track record it has, he figured your city as easy pickings for a shakedown of its residents. I can't tell you how sorry I am. Fashion Girl replied, not as sorry as Chief Marcus and me. We thank you for your time and help. Good day, sir. Fashion Girl left the building, got back into the Glam Mobile, and made a beeline to the airport and back home. While in flight, Fashion Girl asked, if the governor is another brother of the mayor, can we trust him? Chief Marcus answered, I don't know, Fashion Girl. He might have said that he'll help, but I'll bet after we left, he alerted the mayor. Fashion Girl made no remarks. She wanted to get to Godiva before she was arraigned. Chapter 6. Fashion Girl and Chief Marcus arrived in Colonia just in time for Godiva's arraignment. A bailiff said, docket number 17,241, the People versus Godiva. The charge is felony shoplifting. The judge was Donald Coleman. He asked, Counselor, how does your client plead? The lawyer answered, not guilty, Your Honor. The judge then asked for the DA's recommendation for Godiva's sentence. He recommended that Godiva be remanded. Fashion Girl stood up and said, I object to this proceeding. This is outrageous. Judge Coleman replied, You are out of order, Fashion Girl. One more outburst from you, and I'll cite you with contempt. Bail is set at $1 million. Next case. Godiva was chained at the wrists and ankles. She was roughed up by the bailiffs. Before the next case was presented, Fashion Girl asked, Your Honor, may I ask Godiva one question? Disgusted, the judge answered, I'll allow it. Ask your question. Fashion Girl asked, Godiva, were you read your Miranda rights as you were being arrested? Godiva answered, No way, girl. I was short a quarter, and here I am. Satisfied, Fashion Girl said, Your Honor, or dishonor, I should say, not reading someone their rights is a violation of the Constitution and people's rights. The judge replied, Not while my brother is running the show. Now get the hell out of my courtroom. It became clear that most of the people who were arrested knew the style chicks to some degree. Later that afternoon, Fashion Girl and Victoria visited everyone they knew who were in jail. Like what Fashion Girl found out about Godiva, Victoria's assistant chef and prep cook also weren't read their Miranda rights. When they both visited Godiva, Fashion Girl asked, Godiva, tell Vicky and me what happened at the grocery store. Godiva answered, As you both know, it was my turn to do the shopping for the mansion. I bought our supplies everywhere else without any problems, but at the grocery store, I was short a measly quarter. I asked the cashier to void out the last items she rung up. The customer behind me offered to give me the quarter. Then a plainclothes officer came up, and he thought I was trying to get away with something and just arrested me for shoplifting. You heard that crooked judge, I must pay $1 million fine. Fashion Girl, something needs to be done. Fashion Girl asked, I'm almost afraid to ask, but what was it that made you short a quarter? Godiva answered, a pack of gum. You know I always buy some gum when I shop. Fashion Girl said, Listen, Godiva. I'm not paying the fine. If I did, it would be like rewarding those cops for something crooked. We are going to get you out of here. Not before I put an end to this gross abuse of authority. Godiva replied, I understand. Thank you for hearing me out. Fashion Girl said, When I clear you, Vicky's co-workers, and Dean, then you can thank me. In shock, Godiva asked, They got Dean too. Why? Fashion Girl answered, From what I was told, 2 cops went to his garage and saw a poster of me on the wall. They tore it down and arrested him for having contraband. Victoria added, He told me that they're thinking of sending him to San Quentin. Fashion Girl said, I must see him, and I'm putting a plan in motion once I get home. Godiva replied, You go, girl. Go to Dean and give them hell. Fashion Girl said, Don't worry, Godiva. I will. Minutes later, Fashion Girl visited Dean, who was in the maximum security section of the jail. Dean hugged Fashion Girl and said, Honey, I'm so glad to see you. Fashion Girl replied, I'm sorry if I got you in trouble somehow. Dean said, This is outrageous. You didn't get me in trouble. I was in my garage doing my job when these 2 tough-looking cops came in. They didn't buy gas, groceries, or even cigarettes. They saw my poster of you on the wall. They tore it down, tore it up, and said I was displaying contraband. They arrested me, and now I will be sent to San Quentin. San Quentin is a prison for hardened criminals. I didn't do anything wrong. Please help me. Fashion Girl said, Vicky and I just visited 2 of her co-workers who were arrested for jaywalking. Godiva was arrested for shoplifting, and now you for displaying a poster of me. Vicky's co-workers and Godiva all claim that they won't read their Miranda rights. Dean, this is important. When you were arrested, were you read your Miranda rights? Dean replied, No. Fashion Girl said, I don't know too much about the law, but it's my understanding that if your rights aren't told to you at the time of your arrest, the arrest is illegal. Dean replied, I'll take your word for it, but how are you going to stop this senseless situation? Fashion Girl said, I don't know, but I think I have an idea. Penny told me that last night she, Wendy, and Jared went undercover as a pimp and hookers. Tonight, I'm going to join them as their madam. If I learned one thing from my dealings with Victor Miller and Greg soon after, I want to put at least 2 of these bastards away. I'm asking you for your blessing to do this. Dean put his hands in hers and replied, Fashion Girl, anything you need to do to end this chaos, go for it. Fashion Girl said, Thank you, Dean. I promise that I won't do anything but teach a couple of rent-a-cops a valuable lesson. After Fashion Girl and Victoria left the jail, they drove by the restaurant, which had the gate down and a closed sign by order of the health department. Victoria went up to the gate and couldn't open it. Someone had changed the locks. Then the 2 officers, Morgan and Werner, drove by, and Sergeant Morgan said, We told you that you would pay for not serving us. Enjoy being out of work. Ha ha. Victoria got back in the car and said furiously, Fashion Girl, this is an act of war. I hope whatever you have in mind, it works. Yes, Fashion Girl did have a few ideas in mind. The first was to give 2 other officers a lesson in being gentlemen. Other ideas she had were to make another style chicken archangel, but who was the question? Sephora went to the cemetery after dark to summon Chanel's ghost, and that was not all. Fashion Girl asked Tiffany and Macy to go along with the act to rid the town of 2 creepy cops. Penny magically produced costumes for the others, while Fashion Girl did her own costume change. Penny reproduced the black Cadillac Jared was seen in, while Fashion Girl got a Rolls-Royce limousine. Fashion Girl came downstairs in a formal but sexy outfit. She wore a strapless black dress, fishnet stockings, and black boots. She had one of her mink coats in her hand and wore her hair in a ponytail. Fashion Girl asked, Well, how do I look? The others involved had positive comments. But it was Macy who had the most shocking comment, for she said, It was not what Macy said, but how she said it. She was now speaking in fluent Chinese. In English, Macy said, You look great, mate. What do you have in mind, love? Fashion Girl said, You're speaking Chinese. How is that possible? Penny replied, It is I who is making Macy speak Chinese. Her Australian accent would have given her away. She'll revert back to normal once your plan is carried out, boss. Fashion Girl said, Very clever, Penny. And since I speak fluent Chinese, I can still communicate with Macy. I want to try something. She asked what my plan is, so I'll tell her in Chinese. Fashion Girl continued, Chauffeur cringe in English. Fashion Girl said, Macy, you are to act like a hooker and my chauffeur to make a pair of disgusting police officers cringe. You will revert back to speaking English once it's over. Macy understood and replied, in English. Macy replied, Now that I'm speaking Chinese, I am as exotic sounding as I look. This is going to be fun. Fashion Girl said, Jared, go to wherever you ran into those 2 cops with Penny, Wendy, and Tiffany. Now that Macy is speaking Chinese, she'll ride with me. Now then, everyone, let's do it to IT. Fashion Girl and Macy got into the limo and followed the others half a mile back as Operation Dominate was born. Chapter 7. In case you aren't familiar with the Miranda rights, here is a brief description about it. The Miranda warning is part of a preventive criminal procedure rule that law enforcement is required to administer to protect an individual who is in custody and subject to direct questioning or its functional equivalent from a violation of his or her Fifth Amendment right against compelled self-incrimination. In Miranda v. Arizona, 1966, the Supreme Court held that the admission of an elicited incriminating statement by a suspect not informed of these rights violates the Fifth Amendment and the Sixth Amendment right to counsel, through the incorporation of these rights into state law. Thus, if law enforcement officials decline to offer a Miranda warning to an individual in their custody, they may interrogate that person and act upon the knowledge gained but may not use that person's statements as evidence against him or her in a criminal trial. Wikipedia. To make a long story short, since these new cops weren't reading who they arrested these rights, the arrests themselves are not valid. Now to get back to the story, Jared let the girls out and waited down the street. Fashion Girl pulled up behind Jared and waited with him. Fashion Girl asked, Jared, to make this convincing, what did you call yourself and the others? Jared answered, these cops know me as Grandmaster J. I told them that I had a nightclub downtown. I couldn't think of a clever name for Penny, so I'm calling her Blondie. She told them that they could call her anything they want. As for Wendy, I called her Kid Cleavage for obvious reasons. I told them that she's underage, but they didn't seem to care. What do you want to call yourself? Fashion Girl said, if you're Grandmaster J, then I'll call myself Madam D. Jared replied, I like it. Tiffany also came along to get in on the act. On the street, Tiffany didn't have such a name. She was undecided. She said, Penny, if you're called Blondie and Wendy is Kid Cleavage, what should I call myself? Penny answered, since you like to flirt with guys, call yourself Sexpot. Everyone seems to think you are one anyway. Penny told Jared what to call Tiffany if the cops approached them. Fashion Girl needed to come up with a clever name for Macy. In Chinese, Fashion Girl asked, ? Macy answered, ? In English, Fashion Girl asked, Macy, what do you want to call yourself for this mission? Macy answered, I haven't given it much thought. How does my real name, Soon Lee, sound? In Chinese, Fashion Girl replied. In English, Fashion Girl replied, fine with me. Now let's wait and see how this plays out. Jared, Macy, and Fashion Girl didn't have to wait long. For minutes later, Officers Powers and Costa shined their light on the girls. Officer Costa, still in the driver's seat, said, well, ladies. We meet again. Who's the new girl? Tiffany replied, they call me Sexpot. I just love to be in the presence of good-looking men like you. Before Officer Costa could say anything further, Grandmaster J walked up and said, are you harassing my girls again, officer? If you are, you aren't a man of your word. Officer Costa replied, not at all, Grandmaster J. I was just introducing myself to Sexpot. Jared said, Sexpot is as slutty as they come. But I have someone else you should know who's even sluttier. Her limo is pulling up now. With Macy acting as a chauffeur, she got out, went to the back, and let Fashion Girl out. She was walking slow but sexy. With her fur on, a cigarette in one hand, and a glass of champagne in the other, she approached the officers and said, I'm Madam D. I rule this city's underworld. Do you have any business with my girls? If so, state it, or you can deal with me instead. At that moment, Fashion Girl took off her fur and handed it to Jared, crushed her cigarette with her foot, and placed her glass on the police car's hood and continued, not only am I the leader of the underworld, I'm also a dominatrix. You will do as I say, or you will pay the price for disobedience. Now the both of you, get out of your car. Officers Powers and Costa did what they were told as Fashion Girl continued, this is my chauffeur and headmistress, Soon Lee. She speaks only in Chinese. Macy asked in Chinese, D. In English, Macy asked, how would you like to be dominated by Madam D? She likes it rough, do you? After Fashion Girl translated, she said, now get down on your hands and knees. The officers did as they were told. Fashion Girl continued, as she grabbed Officer Costa's head, you and your partner will strip in front of me. If I like it, I will spare you. If not, you will pay. The officers began to take off their clothes one item at a time with Fashion Girl gloating with delight. When they took off their pants, Penny grabbed their guns and tasers. Fashion Girl told the officers to keep their eyes focused on her as Penny fired the taser at Officer Costa. Jared took the other taser and fired it at Officer Powers. When the officers were stunned, Fashion Girl said, I liked your striptease, but you still paid the price anyway, too bad. To hell with your mayor and police chief. I rule this town. What I say goes. If you bother any of my girls again, I won't be so easy on you. You can head back to the station just like you are. Have a nice evening. When the officers drove away with their tails between their legs, everyone cheered and laughed with delight. Tiffany said, Fashion Girl, I fear you as Madam D. That was amazing. Penny asked, what should we do with their clothes, boss? Fashion Girl answered, simple, we'll take it back to the mansion and have a bonfire, but I have a better idea. Now that this charade is over, can you make Macy speak English again, Penny? Penny replied, no problem, boss. With a snap of her fingers, Penny returned Macy to her normal voice and language. Macy came up to the others and said, "Fashion girl, that was so cool. I agree with Tiffany. You are scary as Madam D." Fashion girl replied, "I wasn't trying to be scary. Instead, I wanted those two fools to realize that just because they wear a badge, it doesn't give them carte blanche to harass innocent people. If they want to play, so will we." Once everyone returned to the mansion, they reverted back to their normal costumes and appearances. Over the course of the next several days, the injustice the new police force was dishing out continued. People were getting angry, and some began to riot. However, what they were angry about the most was that Fashion Girl wasn't doing anything to stop it. Fashion Girl decided to hold a press conference to try to calm everyone down, but first she made Madame D rear her head once more. Chapter 8. At daybreak the next morning, Fashion Girl once again disguised herself as Madame D, while Jared disguised himself as Grandmaster J. Penny reproduced Jared's pimpmobile as he and Fashion Girl drove to the police station and deal with Chief Coleman. They walked into the police station with Jared holding the officer's clothes, while Fashion Girl did the same walk she did the night before. Chief Coleman came out after smelling smoke. He came to Fashion Girl and said, "Excuse me, ma'am, but there is no smoking here." Fashion Girl took a drag and blew the smoke in Chief Coleman's face and replied, "You dare tell me what I can or cannot do? No one tells Madame D what to do." Chief Coleman smiled and said, "So you're Madame D. You are very pretty, but I feel that we have met before." Fashion Girl replied, "Who did you think I am that you think that we've met before?" Chief Coleman said, "You have red hair. So does Fashion Girl. If I didn't know better, I think you are Fashion Girl." Fashion Girl replied, "I admit redheads are rare these days, but Fashion Girl isn't the only redhead in this town. Anyhow, this is my associate, Grandmaster J. He was confronted the last 2 nights by, I believe their names are Powers and Costa. We have their uniforms and equipment. However, we emptied their guns." Chief Coleman said, "Thank you for returning these. I heard you tasered them." Fashion Girl replied, "Actually, Grandmaster J used one taser while his whore Blondie used the other, and they set the tasers to the lowest setting possible. We did this to send a message to you. If anybody is going to rule this city with an iron fist, it's me." Chief Coleman asked, "What do you propose, Madame D?" Fashion Girl answered, "Play my game, and we can make beautiful music together. If not, you will be sorry. Now I have a couple of demands for you." Chief Coleman asked, "All right, Madame D. What do you want?" Fashion Girl answered, "First of all, unless you have a health inspector in your pocket, your cops had no right to close Victoria's Bistro. I understand 2 of your officers arrested 2 of her employees for jaywalking and then came back later and demanded free food. Victoria's Bistro serves the best food in town. It's also one of the cleanest. You could eat off the floor. Reopen the restaurant and free the 2 employees." Chief Coleman said, "Consider it done. What else do you want?" Fashion Girl replied, "Your police force seems to target style chicks, or anyone associated with them. I understand you had Godiva arrested for shoplifting. Being short a quarter is not shoplifting. That's one thing. But to have your brother set bail at $1 million is quite another. Release her." Chief Coleman asked, "What else is there?" Fashion Girl answered, "Throwing Dean Simpson in jail for having a poster of Fashion Girl on the wall and calling it contraband is crazy. Look, I have the same distaste for Fashion Girl as you do, but he's also her husband. Release him. Also, reverse the erroneous fines you've given motorists in town and on I-5. I'm not telling you how to do your job, but I don't go around pushing people. I rule the underworld here, but I don't loan shark, sell drugs, or smuggle anything or anyone in or out of the country. You might think that you never heard of me. Just ask anyone in town, they know who I am, but I also get respect. Just remember, play with me, or you will pay the price just like your 2 officers. What's it going to be, Chief?" Chief Coleman said, "If you don't get out of my station in the next 5 seconds, I'll throw you in jail for humiliating my officers." Fashion Girl replied, "You will be sorry you did this." Fashion Girl crushed her cigarette in Chief Coleman's hand and continued, "You just made an enemy in me. You're going down." Others watched in awe as Fashion Girl walked past them. One officer said, Wow. What a woman. Chief Coleman got furious and said, whoever this Madame D is, she is a threat that will disrupt our activities. From this point on, we will be more punishing to the good citizens of this city. When Fashion Girl and Grandmaster Jay returned to the mansion, everyone wondered what happened. Fashion Girl said, Chief Coleman won't budge. As of now, we are at war. Say, has anyone seen Sephora? I hope she didn't get nabbed by those fake cops. Macy replied, she went out last night, but she didn't tell us where. Before Fashion Girl could respond, Sephora walked in. Sephora asked, why is everyone staring at me? Fashion Girl answered, we didn't know where you were. So where were you? Sephora said, I went to the cemetery last night, and I have a surprise for everyone. Look who's here. Sephora motioned for the first person to come in. A familiar person with a familiar voice said, Bonjour, everyone. Most everyone in the mansion was shocked to see that Chanel, who had been dead for nearly 7 years, had come back to life. They all came around her as Fashion Girl said, Chanel. Is it really you? Chanel replied, it's me, ma chérie. Sephora asked me to come back to life to help you solve this case. Fashion Girl still couldn't believe it. She felt Chanel's hand and said, you're alive, you're solid. Chanel replied, I'll stay that way until you win, but I didn't come alone. That was the cue for the next person to come in. Fashion Girl gazed in delight especially and asked, Mom, you're here too. The next person was famed mystery solver Daphne Blake and the original Fashion Girl. The original Fashion Girl answered, it's me, honey. Fashion Girl hugged her mother, and like Chanel, the original Fashion Girl was alive and solid. The original Fashion Girl continued, Sephora told me that she, you, and 3 others are now known also as archangels. Tell me more about it. Fashion Girl replied, not much to tell, Mom. Tiffany, Penny, Sephora, Godiva, and I are now the archangels. We have 10 times the powers and abilities as style chicks, and we can fly. I'm so glad to see you and Chanel. Sephora said, Sax, gather the others for the last surprises for you. After the junior style chicks assembled, Sephora asked the final person to come in. A little girl walked in but didn't say anything at first. The junior team had their mouths open. Sax asked, Rhonda, is it you? Rhonda answered, it's me, girls, and it's great to see you all again. The juniors hugged their departed friend. Rhonda continued, Rosie, you look great. You have your eyesight back. Brittany, Lisa, you also look great. But I don't see Wendy. Wendy replied, Rhonda, I'm right here. Rhonda didn't recognize Wendy as she continued, I gave birth to my baby the night you died. It was almost like when he was born, you died. Sax added, Rhonda, not a day goes by that we don't think of or about you. Your death, sad as it was, helped us all to change our lives. Fashion Girl adopted us. We now live in Atlanta, Georgia. Sephora and her friend Belle Kay, who you might remember, are our guardians. We are all in school now. Wendy and I both got major cash settlements from that company that polluted the lake Wendy and I swam in. The reason why you might not recognize Wendy is because, shortly after you died, she reached the final phase of puberty. She looks like a woman in her 20s, but she's still a child. We all have a bright future ahead. Before Rhonda died, she sounded like she had a rusty nail in her throat. But now she could speak more clearly. She said, in a way, I'm glad I didn't die in vain. You all look great, and I'm happy. Fashion Girl replied, Rhonda, I hope you can help us in fighting this war. You can come in real handy. Rhonda replied, anything for my friends. Sax said, Rhonda, we are now known as the Junior Style Chicks. Like the regular style chicks, we are named for department stores. My new name is Sax as in Saks Fifth Avenue. Wendy added, since I named myself after the restaurant, Fashion Girl allowed me to keep my name the same. Bloomingdale added, I'm now called Bloomingdale. You can call me Bloomy for short. 9 West added, and if you remember, Rhonda, I love shoes, so my new name is 9 West, an upscale shoe store for women. Fashion Girl said, now I have a surprise for all of you. Since Godiva is in jail, another style chick has agreed to become the newest archangel. She will introduce herself to you all. Zara became the newest archangel. As the new archangel, she came out to everybody and said, "Ahoy, mateys. I am Sea Girl. I hope to make a big splash with you and plunder my enemies into prison." Fashion Girl added, "Welcome to the rank of archangel, Zara. As Sea Girl, if I need you, you now can fly off your ship and come to me or the others." Tiffany asked, "What will Zara's new powers be?" "She doesn't have any powers as Zara." Fashion Girl answered, "As Sea Girl, Zara will possess super strength and the ability to manipulate water at her command. She completes the archangels. With your powers of the sun, Tiffany, Penny's abilities to communicate with birds, Godiva's power of lightning, Sephora's power of wind, and my powers of fire, Zara's addition will make us even more invincible. Now, everyone, it's time for me to hold the press conference. Cover Girl, Glamour Boy, and Sax, join me out in the backyard where I can have this conference in peace." Fashion Girl's idea was to have the conference in her backyard because it was private property, and thus, the police can't stop it from happening. The real question, however, is if the new chief doesn't want to interfere with police, can they stop her from speaking her mind? Chapter 9. Before the news conference began, the Marcuses arrived. Mrs. Marcus said, "Fashion Girl, I owe you a major apology. I should have known better to think that you and Peter are having an affair." Fashion Girl replied, "I accept your apology. The only thing the chief and I have in common is our war on crime and keeping this city safe." Victoria came out of the command center and said, "Fashion Girl, I have both Superman and Shira online. They both want an update." Fashion Girl replied, "I'll be right there." "Did you say they were both on?" Victoria said, "Yes." Fashion Girl replied, "Okay, Vicky." Fashion Girl then called her mother over and continued, "Wait here, Mom. I'll bet Shira would be excited to see you again." The original Fashion Girl replied, "I'll wait. I'd like to see her too." Fashion Girl went into the command center. As Victoria said, both the Man of Steel and the Princess of Power were on a split screen. They could see and hear Fashion Girl at the same time. Superman said, "Fashion Girl, Victoria has told us both about what is happening in Colonia. Are you sure that you don't need outside help?" Fashion Girl replied, "I asked Victoria to inform you of what's happening here. I also told her to tell you both not to make a move until you heard from me." Superman asked, "All right, so what is happening there exactly?" Fashion Girl answered, 3 days ago, a new mayor has taken over here. He is a big-time crook who, I understand, bought the election. He had one brother of his take Chief Marcus's place, and another brother threw a popular judge off the bench. The new chief told me that if I tried to stop any crime in town, he'd have me thrown in jail." Shira asked, "What do you mean the mayor bought the election?" Fashion Girl answered, "This man either forced people to vote for him, or he illegally stuffed the ballot boxes with votes. It's a figure of speech. Since then, people have been thrown in jail for petty crimes or have been fined outrageous sums of money. My husband and Godiva are both in prison as I am talking with you. However, major crimes are going literally without notice. In other words, the police won't stop you for robbing a bank. But if you litter, they'll send you to the gas chamber." Superman asked in disbelief, "How can you let this happen and go on for 3 days?" Fashion Girl replied, "Yesterday, Chief Marcus and I went to Sacramento to speak with the governor. He said he would help. However, he said that the mayor is his brother. So far nothing has happened on his part." Shira asked, "Do you want us both to help out?" Fashion Girl answered, "In a couple of hours, I'm holding a press conference to try to calm the people down. Macy Sears and Belle Kay went today to the county sheriff. Godiva was supposed to go too until she was arrested for shoplifting. I know he's not related to the mayor, and maybe he'll help. If not, Vicky or I will let you know. For now, Shira, there is someone who would like to say hello. Come in, please." The original Fashion Girl walked in and said, "Hello, old friend. It's great to see you again." Shira couldn't believe her eyes or ears as she replied, "Daphne. I don't believe it. How is this possible?" Fashion Girl said, "Sephora brought my mother, Chanel, and a girl named Rhonda back from the dead to help." The original Fashion Girl added, "I am dead, Shira, but for now I live to help my daughter and her friends." Superman said, Shira and I will wait for you to give us the signal to come and fight alongside with you. Fashion Girl replied, you will hear from me one way or the other. I must go now. Fashion Girl out. The original Fashion Girl said, Shira hasn't changed one bit. I'm glad she's still fighting for what's right. Fashion Girl replied, she helped us to get the archangels off the ground as well. The original Fashion Girl asked, after the press conference, do you think I could see your dad and my grandchildren? I'd like to tell him that I still think of him and that I still love him. Fashion Girl replied, I think I could arrange that. Minutes later, news crews one by one were setting up shop in the mansion's backyard. The local news channels, CNN, MSNBC, along with Univision and Telemundo, were on hand to witness this news conference. Fashion Girl, Chief Marcus, Glamour Boy, Cover Girl, and Sax stood behind a podium with microphones galore. Usually, Chief Marcus was the person who conducted these news conferences, but this time, it was Fashion Girl who would preside. Fashion Girl said, good afternoon. For the past 3 days, this city has been under siege by a crooked police force, judge, and mayor. Our new mayor bought the election, and he doesn't even live here. He lives in Los Angeles, Beverly Hills, to be more specific. Anthony Coleman is a crooked businessman who has been banned from ever trading on the New York Stock Exchange. He also has several convictions for insider trading as well as pyramid and Ponzi schemes. His brother William Coleman is the new police chief. Upon taking over from Chief Marcus, he told me that if I interfered in any more police business, I would be thrown in jail. I have never interfered unless I'm asked to. For over a decade, I've worked with Chief Marcus and the Colonia Police Department to solve cases that have proven too much for any police force. Another brother, Donald Coleman, who is now the new circuit judge and like his brothers, threw a distinguished judge off the bench. Between the three, the citizens of our city have been fined huge sums of money or thrown in jail for petty and meaningless crimes. Chief Marcus and I went to Sacramento to ask the governor for help. It turns out that he too is related to the Coleman brothers. He promised us that he would send the National Guard here to restore order. We provided the governor a 30-page report detailing what some of the residents have faced. So far, nothing has been done. For example, my fellow style chick Victoria runs a popular restaurant here. 2 of her employees were arrested for jaywalking. Glamour Boy and his fat cats witnessed a neighbor of theirs being pulled over. The officer claimed that this person had a busted taillight. She knew she didn't have a busted taillight, but the officer kicked out one taillight and fined this woman $1,500. My husband runs a garage. He had a poster of me on a wall. 2 officers saw it, tore it down, and arrested him for having contraband. He's in jail here but is slated to be transferred to San Quentin. Another style chick Godiva is also in jail for shoplifting. Shoplifting is a crime, but her real crime was she was 25 cents short. She asked the cashier to void the last item that was rung up. A customer behind Godiva offered to spring for the quarter. An undercover officer overheard this and arrested her. At her arraignment, her bail was set at $1 million. Just for being short a lousy quarter. 2 officers stopped a pair of prostitutes and their pimp and allowed them to continue selling sex for money. An officer robbed a bank in broad daylight. All this and many other travesties of justice have been committed. Now our town that was once the safest city in America is in utter chaos. I'm having this press conference to try to assure the great people of this city that this hasn't gone unnoticed. Now I will answer any questions you may have. A reporter for the CBS affiliate asked, Fashion Girl, there's talk about a woman who calls herself Madam D. What do you know about her? Fashion Girl answered, I am aware of her. She claims to be the leader of the underworld here. She's a dominatrix and gets paid to put guys into submission. The pimp and his 2 hookers I mentioned earlier answer to her. A reporter for CNN asked, if the governor doesn't come up with National Guard troops to help out, how can you protect this city without police interference? Fashion Girl answered, that's a good question, and I wish I have a good answer. With my hands in my pocket, I can't do anything about this. However, the Style Chicks are affiliated with the Justice League and are charter members of the Galactic Alliance. Superman of the Justice League and Shira of the Galactic Alliance are aware of our predicament and are waiting for my signal to bring in reinforcements. Jackie Newman of the NBC affiliate who covers anything that involves Fashion Girl asked, Fashion girl, are you trying to say that if you try to stop the police, you will be put in prison, but if you don't do anything, you can remain free? Fashion girl answered, I'm afraid that's right, Jackie. You've known me for years, and believe me, I don't like this any more than anyone else in town. But I'll tell you this, I can't reveal anything specific. However, the style chicks have a secret weapon, and they too are on alert. Any more questions? A reporter from the ABC affiliate asked, Fashion girl, what can this secret weapon do that the style chicks can't? Fashion girl answered, all I can say is they possess 10 times the abilities we have. For the Univision and Telemundo cruise, Fashion girl made a remark in Spanish, para los miembros de habla hispana de nuestra comunidad, quiero decir que todo se resolverá pero hasta entonces a ser paciente. Vamos a llegar al fondo de esto. In English, Fashion girl said, for the Spanish-speaking members of our community, I want to say that everything will be resolved but, until then, to just be patient. We will get to the bottom of this. She continued, for now, my hands as a superheroine are tied. That's all for now. Thank you all for coming. As Fashion girl and the others went back inside the mansion, she felt that maybe the news conference might have done more harm than good. But it gave the public what they needed to know about their new police force and where she stood on the issue. Fashion girl asked Chief Marcus to speak with him in private, and she unloaded the ultimate bombshell. Fashion girl said, Chief, there's something you need to know. Do you remember meeting a group called the Archangels more than a year ago? Truth of the matter is Tiffany, Penny, Godiva, Sephora, and I are the Archangels. As an Archangel, I'm known as the Phoenix. Since Godiva is in jail, I recruited Zara to be the newest Archangel. She's calling herself Sea Girl. I hope you can keep this a secret. I don't care if people knows that Daphne Simpson and I are one and the same, but the Archangels are the secret weapon this city needs right now. Chief Marcus replied, yes, I remember meeting them. I didn't meet the Phoenix, but you told me about her. I had no idea she was you. Don't worry, Fashion girl. Your secret is safe with me. Fashion girl said, thank you, Chief. If you will excuse me, I want my mother to meet her grandchildren. We'll be back later. Fashion girl had in her closet one of her mother's old outfits. She gave the outfit to her and went to her father's house to see him and her grandchildren. A great surprise was in store for everyone involved. Chapter 10. While Fashion girl's father and her children were being given the surprise of their lives, back at the mansion, Chanel was talking with the others, asking questions and getting caught up. Chanel asked, Sephora, you are the guardian to these young ladies. It's quite impressive. Sephora answered, Merci. You thought I had what it takes to be a style chick. Belle Kay and I still accompany Fashion girl if she needs it. As you heard her say earlier, she needs all the help she can get. But at the sheriff's office, it was a different type of conversation. Macy and Belle Kay were there to plead their case to the county sheriff. Unlike the governor, the sheriff wasn't related to the Coleman brothers. Like Chief Marcus, the sheriff was firm but fair. The sheriff told Macy and Belle Kay that they would send deputies to Colonia. But the sheriff also loaded Macy's car with guns, rifles, tear gas grenades, and other tools to combat the rogue police force. Macy and Belle Kay thanked the sheriff and headed back to Colonia. When they got back to the mansion, the others helped to bring in the weapons. Victoria asked, I think this is all well and good, but we don't know how to use a gun or a rifle. What was the sheriff thinking? Tiffany answered, Fashion girl, Penny, Sephora, and I tried to learn how to shoot a gun when we were in New York. I know guns aren't our style, but if the police want to play dirty, we have to as well. Both Fashion girls came back to the mansion. Fashion girl asked, What's all this? Did a gun shop explode in here? Macy answered, Not exactly, mate. Belle and I came back from the sheriff's office, and he gave us all these weapons. Tiffany just said we need to fight fire with fire. The original Fashion girl added, Daphne, if I had a gun on me the day I was killed, I might be alive for real today. If this is what it takes to bring these terrible people down, so be it. Fashion girl replied, Mom, I learned how to shoot a gun in New York. I can teach the others how to use it too. The sword of style is a great weapon, but if my enemy is using a gun, I need to use one too. The original Fashion girl said, I don't want you to end up dead like me. Be very careful, please. I wasn't there for you when you were growing up. Don't do the same to my grandchildren. Fashion Girl turned to everyone and said, Look, everybody, I know using guns and other such weapons aren't our style. But to rid our city of these renegade cops is to do what they do. However, I noticed the county sheriff also gave us tasers. We will use them first and only use firearms as a last resort. Tomorrow at dawn, we will begin our counterattack. Good night, everyone, and sleep well. When dawn came, Fashion Girl said, Good morning, everyone. Here is how we will do battle with the police. Mom, Chanel, and Rhonda, since you are all spirits, you will be our first line of defense. You can become ectoplasmic and solid at will. Macy, Vicky, and Belle, you will be armed with tasers. See a cop, use it on them. Next, Jared, you and Wendy will once again become Grandmaster Jay and Kid Cleavage to flush out cops. For most of you, you will scout all areas of the city. Finally, Tiffany, Penny, Sephora, Zara, and I will become the Archangels and will be the last line of defense. Penny asked, Good plan, boss, except for one thing. We've never been the Archangels in the daytime. Can we be as effective like we are at night? Fashion Girl answered, It's true we've never been the Archangels in the daytime before, except when we trained. But we become the Archangels when we've exhausted all other options. Good luck, everyone. Archangels, let's rock. Fashion Girl raised her arms, crossed her wrists, and said, Style me as the Phoenix. Tiffany did the same and said, Style me as Solara. Penny did the same and said, Style me as Nighthawk. Sephora did the same and said, Style me as Whirlwind. Zara was about to become an archangel for the first time. She followed the others and said, Style me as Sea Girl. In seconds, each styled chick underwent an incredible transformation, and one by one assumed their roles as archangels. The original Fashion Girl said, That's incredible, Daphne. I hope you will do well. The Phoenix replied, We have yet to fail, Mom. We are unstoppable as archangels. Let's put our plan in motion. The rogue police force also took to the streets fighting with regular citizens, arresting them, or giving out huge fines. In one case, 9 west of the junior-style chicks took a gun and aimed it at the police. She said, I might know how to use a gun, but I've never killed anyone with it. Give up this madness or give up breathing. 9 West wasn't alone, for she had 2 deputies with her, and they performed the arrest. The other juniors also helped apprehend more officers with the sheriff's help. Macy and Belle Kay stopped other officers with sleeping potions. The Cosmo Chicks fired an aerial assault, stunning more than 36 officers. The Fat Cats protected their neighborhood from the bad cops. But the Phoenix went after the big prize, Chief William Coleman and his brother Judge Donald Coleman. The Phoenix asked, Why are you in a hurry, gentlemen? Leaving town so soon? Chief Coleman replied, The judge and I are leaving. We got what we came for. The money this city has. Once we join the mayor in Los Angeles, we will be more powerful than ever. The Phoenix said, I insist you stay a while. At that moment, the Phoenix put up a wall of flames on 3 sides. The others tried to retreat, but the Phoenix enclosed the wall. The Phoenix said, Hot under the collar. You will surrender to me, or I'll make you extra crispy. The Phoenix made the wall of flames smaller, leaving only a small amount of room. She began to laugh maniacally and said, Do you surrender, or do I turn you into ash? Decide now. The chief and judge both put up their hands in surrender. Contingents of deputies in riot gear were waiting to place the chief and judge under arrest. The Phoenix said, Sea Girl, cool off our prey. Zara's new powers enabled her to get water from anywhere at will. She magically opened a fire hydrant and put out the flames. Once the flames died down, the chief and judge were placed under arrest. The Phoenix said, You will set everyone who is in jail free. You will allow Victoria's Bistro to reopen. And you will forego any fines you levied. The chief and judge stood silently and told a deputy to get a set of keys to open the cells. After they were dragged away, Solara asked, Hey, Phoenix, what was with the evil laugh? The Phoenix answered, I don't know, but to answer your question, I wanted to strike fear into those 2. They'll have plenty of time in jail to think about what they did to this city. I'll have Vicky contact the LAPD and place his honor under arrest. Solara asked, how can anyone be in charge of a city without living in that city? The Phoenix answered, remember what Fashion Girl uncovered. The mayor bought the election without casting a single ballot himself. The next day, Fashion Girl and Chief Marcus stood in front of City Hall to a cheering crowd. The crowd chanted for Fashion Girl to become mayor. Fashion Girl calmed the crowd down and said, I'm honored that you want me to be mayor. I feel I'd be more effective in the streets than behind a desk. But I think Chief Marcus should become our next mayor instead. Before the crowd could react, Chief Marcus added, I'll continue to be police chief until we have another election. I would be proud to serve our city as mayor. If elected, I will have Fashion Girl, who has helped the police with major crimes, become our special police advisor. She will help undo the damage caused by the police. The crowd cheered on for both of them. In conclusion, Los Angeles police arrested Anthony Coleman for voter fraud and was given the maximum sentence. His two brothers were also charged with false imprisonment and other criminal offenses. They also were given maximum sentences. The governor was forced out of office primarily for being related to the others even though he wasn't crooked. The lieutenant governor immediately took over. The new election was held with Chief Marcus winning by a landslide. He hired back his former police force and, as promised, made Fashion Girl a special police advisor, which meant she was not only working with the police but working for the police. Within a month, everything in town was returned to normal. Victoria's Bistro had a grand reopening and gave the police officers one free meal. Godiva could continue to do grocery shopping at the store she was arrested in. Dean Simpson returned to work at his garage and put up a new poster of Fashion Girl. Judge Hamilton returned to his rightful place on the bench. Chief Marcus kept Fashion Girl's other identity as the Phoenix a secret. Finally, Fashion Girl, Sephora, and the junior chicks said goodbye to their fallen comrades. It was a heartfelt and moving goodbye. The original Fashion Girl said, "Thank you, Daphne, for allowing me to see Fred and Fred Jr. and to meet my grandchildren. You've made me proud." Fashion Girl had no reply, she just hugged her mother and was shedding tears. But it was their help that brought down the rogue cops and helped make Colonia, California, once again the safest city in America.
I hope that you enjoyed this story. If you like what you heard, the Fashion Girl trilogy is available for sale both in bookstores and online. Online, you can find it on Amazon, eBay, iTunes, and Google Books. You can download it as a digital copy or purchase a hard copy. It is available on paperback, and you can get it at a discounted price on Amazon. I hope that you once again enjoyed this story. We're going to have some great entertainment for you now that the USCFL is in the off-season. And until then, this is Robbie Graham of the USCFL Network wishing you peace. Take care and stay safe. And as Fashion Girl would say, stay stylish.
Celle-ci en 37, s'il vous plaît. I like bikinis, so I go to Milano, and I speak Italiano.